Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really gripping script adaptation for a project called Church Without Walls. And let me tell you, this story rips the Band-Aid completely off interpersonal conflict. We're going to break down the sheer emotional wreckage of a shattered relationship, but we're also going to look at the creative mind behind it all. I mean, we really have to explore the intense, probably pretty dark headspace that writer Micaiah Thompson had to inhabit to craft such a devastating narrative.
So what happens when a pastor's sanctuary becomes the site of his deepest betrayal? It's a powerful hook, right? For a spiritual leader like Pastor Moses, the church is a place of refuge. It's this sacred space meant to guide others. But here, that sanctuary is just entirely upended. We're dealing with profound betrayal, completely shattered trust, and it's all playing out where literally everyone can see it. It really forces you to ask, how does someone in a position of such immense spiritual authority handle the complete, highly visible collapse of their own personal life?
And that brings us right to the first major turning point, the pastor's public testimony. Now, this isn't your standard Sunday sermon by any stretch. It's a moment of just sheer, devastating vulnerability. Just imagine the immense pressure on Pastor Moses here. He has to stand up in front of his entire congregation, the exact same people who look up to him for guidance and strength, and he's forced to just completely strip away his armor of leadership. He's standing there completely exposed to the judgment, the pity, and the shock of his own community.
The source text actually explicitly notes Moses' intense public testimony and his difficult decision to announce his divorce. Think about the staggering emotional toll of that. Announcing a divorce is painful enough on its own, but declaring it to a room full of people who depend on you for spiritual guidance, that carries a crushing emotional burden. And the script doesn't shy away from this pain at all. It really forces us to feel the unbearable weight on Moses' shoulders as he has to speak those words out loud.
To capture this kind of atmosphere, writer Micaiah Thompson had to tap into raw emotion, that unguarded, truly visceral display of personal pain and tension. You really have to wonder about the heavy headspace required to write a scene like this. Because it's not some sanitized administrative announcement. No way. You can practically feel the suffocating silence in that sanctuary and the shared discomfort as the polished facade of the pastor completely falls away and all that's left is a deeply, deeply wounded man.
But we have to ask, what actually led to this agonizing moment? Well, the root cause is a shattering marital betrayal. This wasn't some external attack on his character or a rival church trying to take him down. It was an intimate violation orchestrated from within his own home. The entire foundation of his personal life was quietly hollowed out by the person closest to him. And that's exactly what makes his public testimony this open, bleeding wound rather than just a moment of, leadership transparency.
Now here is where the psychological dynamic becomes truly unsettling. On one side, you have Moses, who is utterly broken and displaying this raw vulnerability as he tries to navigate the tragedy. But on the other side, his estranged wife Linda acts as though she simply does not care. It's a chilling juxtaposition. While he is agonizing over the fallout and worrying about his congregation, she just remains completely detached. Thompson's writing brilliantly weaponizes this cold apathy. Because, look, being betrayed is one thing, but being betrayed by someone who views your suffering with absolute indifference, that is what makes Moses' emotional climb so incredibly steep.
As you'll see, the narrative's pressure builds on a very clear, escalating path, like a pressure cooker. Months ago, we have the initial quiet betrayal, this marital fracture happening silently behind closed doors. Then, fast forward to days ago, the explosive public divorce announcement rips that private pain out into the glaring light. And that brings us to today. The community center confrontation. The pressure has just been building relentlessly, moving from this intimate deception to a full-blown public scandal, and leading straight into a highly volatile climax.
Which brings us to the absolute peak of the tension, the high-stakes confrontation. All that private pain and those public declarations finally collide, shifting the story into an explosive standoff. The community center, which is normally this safe, neutral place of gathering and fellowship, becomes the unlikely battleground for this deeply personal war. It's no longer just about sadness or dealing with public embarrassment. It's an active, high-stakes battle for survival and his standing in the community.
So inside this room, the power dynamics completely shift. We have Moses, who is already emotionally depleted, fighting for his standing and facing Linda and her cold apathy. But here's the kicker. She isn't alone. She's flanked by Deacon Thomas. Suddenly, this isn't just a marital dispute anymore. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a structural mutiny within the church itself. Linda's opposition is immediately legitimized by a figure of authority, which effectively backs Moses into a really tight corner.
I want to point out that the source material uses a very specific word here. It describes this as a confrontation with the imposing Deacon Thomas. That single word adds a formidable, almost physical threat to the scene. Thomas isn't just there to be a neutral mediator, he represents a direct institutional challenge to Moses' leadership. When you pair that with Linda's apathy and her betrayal, you realize exactly what Moses is up against. He is fighting a war on two fronts: personal heartbreak from his wife and a full-on authoritative mutiny from his deacon.
Ultimately, though, this deeply mature narrative finds its resolution through a really fascinating pivot. Despite all the overwhelming odds, the intense public humiliation, and the very imposing threat of Deacon Thomas, the story drives toward a definitive legal victory for Moses. It's a super compelling shift, moving from sheer emotional devastation to rigid, authoritative justice. He secures his professional position, even when his personal life is basically in ruins.
So Moses manages to navigate the wreckage. He asserts his authority, he faces the betrayal head-on, and he secures a legal win. But, as we've seen, Micaiah Thompson doesn't really write fairy tale endings. This narrative understands nuance. Yes, Moses achieves a legal triumph, but he does it standing amidst total emotional wreckage. He wins the structural battle, for sure, but the personal scars, the brutal sting of the betrayal and the struggle for his own identity, those remain deeply etched into his life and his ministry.
And that leaves us with a really profound final thought to chew on. What is the cost of legal triumph when it comes at the expense of a painful personal betrayal? Because, look, a legal victory can restore order, it can protect assets, and it can reaffirm authority. But it absolutely cannot undo raw emotion, public humiliation, or the cold apathy of someone you once loved. It leaves us pondering exactly what victory really looks like for Pastor Moses when the dust finally settles. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this explainer. It's a truly gripping story, and it's definitely going to stay with you long after the final page.